Thank you, Marlene. That was lovely. Could you be a Messiah to me? Let's open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. And let's start in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. Jesus had some words. In my Bible, these are red. It says, "You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak what is good? For the mouth speaks of that which fills the heart. The good man brings of his good treasure what is good, and an evil man brings out of his evil treasure what is evil. But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an account of in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." I wanted to talk about words because I think that we sometimes underestimate the power of our words. I heard an interesting clip. I think now I enjoy listening to the radio show Dave Ramsey, now called Ramsey Solutions. I think he's preparing to retire. And he had a caller the other day, and I heard it, and so then I went and looked for it and found the clip on YouTube, and Bob was so kind to record this so that you can listen to it. Now, it's short. It's only for about 45 seconds. We're going to listen to it twice because it's kind of funny to start off with, but I want you to hear what is said. So pay very close attention to the words that are said and kind of the tone of the words. Go ahead, Bob.
Up next is going to be Chris in Los Angeles. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Ramsey Show.
Hey, Dave. How are you doing?
Great, man. What's up?
There's a couple things. One, you've done some great work, and in some ways I love you. In other ways, you're stupid and arrogant.
Okay. How can I help you?
All right.
By the way, that's a great way to start any conversation right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my first question would be, are you smarter than Warren Buffett?
How old are you?
Because I'm 35.
Okay, cool. So what? I'm sorry. Let's stop just a second. What's the point of your call? How can I help you?
All right. You're stupid and arrogant. Are you smarter than Warren Buffett? Wow. What a way to start. So do you think these are words to convince someone or offend someone? Did you all hear that? Do you want me to play it again, or did you all get it? You got it? Okay. So this guy starts off, wow. I would have to say the arrogance. That is quite a way to start a conversation. So the first thing he says is, I kind of admire you. That's kind of a backhanded compliment, don't you think? That's kind of, you're like bracing. You're like, okay, what's next? Then he calls him stupid. Ouch. And then what did he do? He compared him to Warren Buffett, but not in a good way. Are you smarter than Warren Buffett? Well, that's a really hard question to answer. So the crux of his call was Dave Ramsey recommends actively managed mutual funds for retirement investments. And Warren Buffett has said that he thinks most people would be benefited by using ETFs, or exchange-traded funds, which just sort of copy the broader stock market, and the fees are really low on those. And so this is the crux of the argument. And Dave manages to get a few good-natured zings back on this young man. But what he kind of said was, sure, if you want to follow Warren Buffett, go ahead. But realize that Warren Buffett's not actually following his own advice, because Warren Buffett owns Berkshire Hathaway, which is an actively managed fund. And I follow my own advice, which is I invest in the things I tell you should invest in. So that was the kind of the finish of the conversation. But it really made me think about words that we use. And I know that I've had some conversations that probably sounded pretty close to that, and I would say most of you have too. And if you think back, most of those conversations probably didn't end very well. So I wanted to talk about that. There's a book which the other co-host on the guy that said, wow, what a great way to start a conversation, recommended. I've ordered it. I haven't read it yet. I'm planning to read it. But I looked up the summary of it. And so I found a great quote from it. It's from Dale Carnegie. And it says, "How to win friends and influence people." And he says, criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defensive and usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts his sense of self-importance, and arouses resentment. Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. But it takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving. Which is kind of paralleled in Proverbs chapter 15, verses 28, where it says, "The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things." So it goes back to our verse that we talked about already in Matthew. It says in verse 34, the second half says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh." So what's abundant in your heart? Is Jesus reflected in what you say? The English historian, mathematician, poet, they went on and on. Thomas Carlyle says, "A great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men." I really like that. Because don't we all inside have just a little bit of, I'm a great man, I'm a great woman? And it's so easy for us to look at other people and go, okay, I'm like this, and you're like this. A great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men. So, if you are needing to convince someone or talk to someone, here's a few pointers, unlike that young man could have learned from. It says, first off, avoid an argument. Isn't that the truth? And then approach someone with real appreciation and show respect. Dave Ramsey, I've learned so much from you. I have a question that I don't understand. That would have gotten him so much further. Of course, then I wouldn't have had a great clip to play. Ask real questions and listen to the answer. Even if you're trying to convince someone of something else, ask real questions and then listen to the answer. And if you're trying to convince someone of your point of view, allow the other person to do most of the talking. And one that I'm really, really guilty of is don't talk over someone else. I was passing out some literature to someone, I think I shared this once before, in Yellowstone, and it turns out it was a gentleman that was Latter-day Saints, and I had just given him a magazine, and he was talking, and I did a little talking, and I felt like I wasn't getting my point across, and I heard myself talking over him. And I thought, oh man, that's bad form. You need to listen. You need to listen. Have you ever noticed how fast you can think? I had to look it up, because, and of course this is probably just a guesstimate, but most people can speak at 125 words a minute. But they estimate you can think at 800 words a minute. That's very fast. And then, once someone starts to come around to your idea, let them think that they thought the solution themselves. We don't have to convince them, yeah, you know, I told you that. That's not going to engender them to your idea. And this one is my favorite, I think. It's not easy, but it works. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing others. Isn't that something that we've all done? We've all made our own mistakes. And then if you're having to tell someone how it needs to be, make the other person happy about doing what you think is the best. Help them to find joy in the solution that you're telling them they have to do. That's kind of a leadership thing. And then finally, praise even slight improvements. As a parent, that's so important. Oh, you did such a good job. You did it with a positive attitude. Maybe you could say the positive attitude if the job wasn't good, but you're making progress, you know. And this all kind of comes back to, I don't know what verse it is. It's in Proverbs chapter 20. I don't know what verse. It says, a plan in the heart of a person is like deep water, but a person of understanding draws it out. Let's all go. There's a story in the Bible, I think, that illustrates a lot of these principles. So if you'll go with me to 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12. Let's read that story together real quick. So this was after David sinned with Bathsheba. Nathan the prophet came to King David, and he said, there were two men in one city, in 2 Samuel chapter 12. One rich and the other poor. And the rich man had a great many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe, which he bought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and his children. It would eat of his bread and drink of his cup and lie on his bosom, or his lap. And it was like a daughter to him. And now a traveler came to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take of his own flock or his own herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him. Rather, he took the poor man's ewe lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Then David's anger burned greatly against the man, and he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, surely the man who's done this deserves to die. He must make restitution for the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing and had no compassion. So Nathan has come, and he's told him this story. It's like he's asking the king, judgment. We need judgment here. Would you please review this? And the king says, oh, that was terrible. Now, did the law call for killing the man, putting the man to death? No. The law called for him repaying fourfold. It did not call for the death sentence. Then David's anger burned greatly against the man. Oh, we read that part. Verse 7, it says, Nathan said to David, you are the man. And then he says what the Lord said. He didn't go to David and say, you dumb king. He drew him out. He told him a story to get him engaged. David let his guard down. He listened. He became interested. And then by the word of the Lord, Nathan said, you are the man. And then he pronounced what God had said. The sin that leads to the most unhappy results is cold, critical, unforgiving spirit that characterizes Pharisaism. When the religious experience is devoid of love, Jesus is not there. The sunshine of his presence is not there. Don't we need Jesus? We all need Jesus in our heart to shine out. That was what our scripture was about, was a well of water springing forth that others can see, others can hear what we have to say. Jesus had said in Luke chapter 6, verse 43, for there is no good tree that bears bad fruit, nor on the other hand, a bad tree that bears good fruit. What's in our heart is what's going to come out. You know, there's a lot of controversy in the world now. And you see it, if you watch the news, you see it. If you talk to people, you hear it. There's a lot of controversy. And one day I was at work and I was talking to one of the surgeons. And he said, I called this, I think it was an infectious disease doctor. And he said, I asked him about coronavirus and vaccines. And so he tells us what this guy said. He's like, this isn't me. He says, I'm just a bone doctor. This is what the other guy said. And so there was a nurse and I, and we listened, and we started raising some objections. Well, what about this and what about that? But it was a conversation. This was not an argument. Nobody talked over each other. Nobody made any personal attacks. We just said, well, yeah, he says that, but have you thought of this or have you thought of that? And then the OR was ready, and so we all went our ways to go do stuff. And about a week later, I saw this person, and he comes up to me and he says, I went home and I thought about what you and Candace had to say, and I think you guys are right. I think you guys are actually right. I'm like, wow, that was actually really easy. I didn't have to convince him of anything. I just kind of asked some questions and said, hey, remember when we used to think da-da-da? This and that? And so I want to encourage you to have that spirit of kind words, of Jesus' love. Now, I've also been in experience. I have two short experiences here that I want to talk about. There was a time that I didn't. I let anger and animosity build up. I was working with someone that I would not consider top-notch. They did things that I didn't like. They did things that other people didn't like. I think that this person was doing the best that they could. I'm not criticizing them for that, but they weren't A grade on their game, if you will. And I would see things going sideways, if you will. And you're always in a tough place. What do you say? How do you respond to that? They have a responsibility of who they're taking care of. I have a responsibility. We're like spokes at a wheel, and we're taking care of someone, and they're in the middle, but we're coming at it from different angles. And so we have to harmonize this to make it safe for the person, but also get the job done. We've got a job to do. And I could see that what was going on was not working, and this doctor told me, you give this medication and give it over this amount of time, and this is the dose I want you to give. And they weren't necessarily wrong, but their dosing is for used over there, not for where I work. And so I said, oh, okay. So I got the medicine, and I only gave half the dose because I don't want to get burned. I don't want this person's blood pressure to be too low. I want it to be just right. Right now it's too high. And so, and further, when you're dosing a big dose, which is what you would do in an emergency room in a crisis, where you have somebody who's awake or somebody who's going to have a stroke or is having a stroke, and their blood pressure is too high, and you're going to give them a big dose, and you're going to keep giving it to them until their blood pressure gets down. The directions for this specific medication specifically say it should be given over 2 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to give a teeny tiny dose, and the volume is going to be about like that much. So in anesthesia, most of the time, we don't do the 2-minute thing. We just give it because we're giving such a small amount. So that's what I did. And so the doctor looks up and says, did you give that medicine? Yeah. Did you get over 2 minutes? No. Yeah. I did not have the best spirit. I had a spirit of stubbornness and argumentativeness. And we proceeded to have an argument. This person said, well, the book says, and I said, really? Come on, I'm giving like this much. So we had this argument, and finally they kicked me out of their room. Which was fine, because I was glad to get out of that room. And the kind of funny part was the person that came to relieve me was somebody that this person had also had arguments with. So it was like hot water to hot water. But anyways. But it was really interesting to me that one of the nurses in the room, when she heard what I said, She told me later, she thought, oh, Joel, please don't go down that road. Don't argue with this person. Don't say it like that. And that really kind of hurt afterwards, because somebody else was looking at me and saying, he's not having a Christian attitude. Maybe that's not what she thought. Maybe that's not what she said to me, but that's what reflected back to me, is I could see that wasn't a very Christian attitude. And let me tell you, that interaction of 3 or 4 minutes, because it wasn't very long, I regretted for months, because then I had to have a meeting, and we had to sit down, and we had to talk about this, and that meeting lasted an hour and a half, and I got chewed up one side and down the other, and they didn't have anything nice to say. Nothing nice to say. And they went so far as to threaten my job. Not that they had the ability to do that, but they did anyways. How much better would it have been to clearly communicate, Doctor, I'm uncomfortable with that dosage. How about we pause the procedure, I'll give half the dosage, we'll wait until it kicks in, and then we can always give a second dose afterwards. How easy would that have been? It would have been so easy. But instead, I was stubborn and said, I'm right. Because technically, other than giving the medicine in less than 2 minutes, which I asked all my buddies, would you do that? Oh, no. We just give it right away. Other than that, everything that I did, I was within my legal rights to do. I'm the one responsible for that patient. I'm responsible for the patient's blood pressure and breathing. They're responsible to perform the procedure, and although they can tell me things, technically they can't order me to do stuff. But even with that, I didn't handle it very well, and it would have been so much better if I'd handled it different. Now, there's a second story that I want to tell you, because I spent a lot of time praying about that and thinking about it. That was a couple years ago. Just a couple months ago, I was in the operating room. We were doing a procedure, and I had an experience that turned out to be very positive, and it had to do with words. And I'm not saying that we don't have to speak up when we see something wrong. We may have to speak up. We may have to say, stop. We may have to say, you shouldn't do that. But a lot of it is in how we do it and what we say. So we were sat there, and we were getting ready to roll a patient up on their side to do the procedure. And the patient was sedated. And normally they just breathe in an oxygen mask, and everything would be hunky-dory, and we'd roll them on their side, and everything would be fine. But they kept coughing, and their oxygen sat would go down a little bit, and I was getting more and more concerned. And we should have rolled them up on their side. And once we roll them up on their side, it's going to be much easier for them to breathe, because their jaw's not falling back, and they're not snoring. And so we were getting ready to roll them, but usually the doctor, big strong guy, and then there's a big strong assistant, and they just pick them up and roll them up on their side. I just hold their head. I just get the easy part. And but the assistant guy wasn't there, so we asked a nurse, kind of a petite nurse, let's do it. And she says, I'm going to hurt my back if I do that. And so there was a back and forth and frustration, because, well, now how do we do it? Because the surgeon's always used to doing it like this. And my patient's not doing so good, and I want to get them on their side quick. And so I said, we need to roll this patient over. And the surgeon says, no, wait, we have to do this. And they went on arguing about this, and I'm getting more and more concerned. And I realized nobody's listening to me. His whole mind is engrossed in trying to figure out his problem. He's looking at the world like this, and I'm looking like this. And that's our job. That's what we're both supposed to be doing. That's nothing wrong with that. But he wasn't listening to me, and I had already told him once, maybe twice, I don't remember. Finally, I'm like, I got to get this guy rolled over right now. And so I literally yelled in the OR, roll him over right now! And as this is coming out of my mouth, remember I said you can think 800 words a minute? So I thought, man, I don't want anybody to get mad at me and think that I was yelling at them and I'm angry, or that I'm just trying to override the surgeon and say, just roll him over however you have to. I'm concerned about his safety. I don't care how we get rolled over. We just got to roll over right now. And so as soon as I yelled that, I said in a more normal tone, and we can finish positioning him in a second. And so we got him rolled up, and then there was more arguing, and then we decided this guy's not doing so good, and so I have to put a breathing tube in. And so we roll him flat, and I put the breathing tube in, and he's thrown up some stuff and breathed it in. This is bad, bad, bad news. So as soon as I get the breathing tube in, the surgeon now recognizes we're in trouble and that he's been not listening, and he's so apologetic, and he keeps apologizing. And I'm close to system overload. I got 4 things I got to fix right now. And he kept trying to apologize and talk and stuff. And so finally I put up my hand and I said, I need you to be quiet right now. And I said, I got to work on some stuff, okay? Please be quiet for a minute. And so everybody, it was quiet. And I mixed up the drugs and did everything that I needed to, and we had to cancel the surgical case. The patient didn't get their surgery. And the surgeon, and then I'm like, okay, now everything's more stable now. Now we can talk. We made a plan, and we did it. And the surgeon just apologized over and over for not listening. And one of the people he was arguing with then got the biggest kick out of me telling him to be quiet during the procedure. But I was cheerful. I was not angry. And he could see that. He could see that I was trying to just do what was best. And so it turned out to be good communication all around. And what was the difference? It was the spirit that those 2 situations. The difference was the spirit. I wasn't angry. I wasn't saying, ooh, this person's bad. I was saying, I'm just trying to do what's right. And that's what we need to have, is the Spirit of Jesus in our hearts shining out, just like what we've been reading about in the Scripture. It shines out. So let's go. We can't have a sermon about words and not look at Matthew chapter 18. So let's look at Matthew chapter 18, and let's talk about that for a second. All right, now, you might be jumping down to, whoops, wrong page. You might be trying to jump down to chapter 15. To verse 15. But let's go back. Let's start at verse 1 of Matthew 18. It says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and said, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called to himself and set before them and said, let's see, did I miss it? A little child. He called a little child and sets a little child before them and says, truly I say unto you, unless you are converted and become like a little child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. We have to be willing to be taught. We have to be teachable and humble. That's what Jesus is talking about. And then let's skip down to verse 7, and it says, woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks, for it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come. But woe to the man through whom the stumbling blocks comes. So, of course, there's going to be stumbling blocks, but let's not be the one with our toe out. That's what Jesus is talking about there. Don't be the stumbling block. And then if we go down to verse 12, it talks about the man with the 100 sheep. One sheep is missing. And he goes out and he looks for the sheep. And when he finds it, he comes home. And does he go home and he goes, yes, I have 99 sheep. Now he goes, I found the one lost sheep. He loves all his sheep, but this one is special right now because it was lost and he found it. So what have we talked about in this chapter so far? We talked about being humble and teachable like a little child. We've talked about don't be a stumbling block. And then we've talked about go out and search for the lost. And then, a big and then, we get to verse 15. Did you notice that? We've talked about all these other things. And now we get to the part, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. A great quote I found says, in the church, militant men will be ever in need of restoration from the results of sin. The one who in some respects is superior to another is in other respects inferior to him. Every human being is subject to temptation and in need of brotherly interest and sympathy. The exercise of mercy in our daily relations with one another is one of the most effective means of attaining perfection of character, for only those who walk with Christ can be truly merciful. Isn't that what we need? Isn't it that we need mercy when we've made a mistake, and that we need to give mercy when someone else makes a mistake? So we have the Matthew chapter 18. We have those 3 parts, and then we have the part of go to your brother personally. Don't go to your brother's friend. Don't go to anybody else. You go directly to your brother, and you talk to them, and you allow the mercy of Christ to speak through you. Don't you really appreciate it when somebody leads by example? I remember, I still take this person as example. There's a friend of mine, Marika and I moved to their house right after we got married. We were going to live in a 5th wheel, and he says, hey, come on over. I've got a RV hookups. It was a little private, set away from their house. They lived out in the country. It was just lovely. And that man is a neat freak in a good way. His garage, so organized. And he would say things like, you don't put a dirty tool back in the toolbox, because then your toolbox is going to be full of grease. So you always wipe it off before you stick it back in there. And we just went on a camping trip recently, and it just cracked me up, because he has a very new, I think it was new this year, or maybe it was new last fall, a very nice, almost brand new travel trailer. And it had rained, and we'd driven in the rain and stuff. And so the next morning, he's out there, and he has one of those yellow lint-free shop towels, and he's going around wiping off the bottom of his trailer. We're on a camping trip, man. Did he tell me, Joel, you better get over there and wipe the mud off your trailer? I didn't have a towel. I didn't wipe the mud off my trailer. I will wash it, though. But he didn't tell me what to do. He's never really told me what to do. He's led by example. His garage, I still desire to emulate his garage. His garage is impeccably organized. He has a spot for all those little spray cans. He has his toolbox full of all of his clean tools. He's leading by example. Shouldn't we lead by example? Wouldn't Jesus in our hearts shining out make people see, wow, look at that person. They are a shining example of Christ's character. In closing, I wanted to read, there was one quote I found. I couldn't get it into my message because I had already printed it. It says, but I thought this was just amazing. It says, a tender spirit, a gentle winning deportment may save the erring and hide a multitude of sins. The revelation of Christ in your own character will have a transforming power upon all with whom you come in contact. Let Christ be daily made manifest in you, and he will reveal through you the creative energy of his word, a gentle, persuasive, yet mighty influence to recreate other souls in the beauty of the Lord our God. And that's what I want. I want my words to be sweet and kind. Sometimes we may have to speak words of admonition or warning. We may have to go to someone and show them their fault. But God wants us to be leading by example, and that when we go to that person, we use the persuasive, kind words, not insulting words like the young man who called the Dave Ramsey show. We don't want to go calling someone stupid. We want to be calling someone to higher ground. May that be your experience, and I pray that the Lord will continue to give me that experience in all the interactions that we have. All right, I wanted to close with the song, The Woman at the Well, because I felt like that really kind of exemplifies what our experience should be. We want that well of life, that spring that welling up within us that will never thirst again.